Good morning, everyone. Britt Simon here. I hope your weekend is starting off well. It's a 3-day weekend here in the USA, so I'm planning a little trip. But before I get out of here on a little trip, I'm gonna talk to you and see if we can explain some things. Okay, morning, Joe. How you doing? I love it when people call me Uncle B. That's really cool. Okay, look, there's some really good questions that I would like to get to, but in the beginning of this video, I want to sort of take a little bit of time to go through an explanation with you with regard to how the government system works in the USA. What's prompted this is over the last couple of days, I've had a lot of questions with just sort of fundamental confusion about how how the current pause is operated, about various lawsuits that will be put forward, about what the president can and can't do, and whether whether this is all part of some elaborate plan to stop DV lottery immigrants and that sort of thing. And then I think the final straw for me this morning was I saw a question that was something along the lines of, why doesn't Congress stop Trump doing this horrible thing to DV lottery? That's basically what the question was, right? And it just shows a complete lack of understanding of how the American government system works. And it may be confusing to people. So I thought it would be worth just spending a few minutes just talking about that right in the beginning. And then we'll get to some of your questions a little bit later. Okay. So right from the beginning. And this is, I've described this as Civics 101. If you go through education in America, they take a thing called civics courses. I should probably say, by the way, I've never taken a civics course, right? This is a British person's interpretation of the US governmental system. But to be clear, I'm not a lawyer. I've never been through the American education system myself, so I could make mistakes in what I'm about to tell you. I don't think so, but it's possible that I can make mistakes. If I make a mistake with something, don't get excited about it. No need to tell me about it, and I don't care. I'm not. This is a general perspective for those of you that don't really understand what's going on, right? Okay, so. All right, so it's often said that there are three branches of government, and sometimes you'll hear the term there are three co-equal branches of government, and that refers to the Constitution. The Constitution of America said, how are we going to run this country? And if you imagine when the Constitution was created, it was created when people were leaving their old home countries, such as the UK, such as Britain, and they wanted to do things a different way. Much of the U.S. government is actually taken from English law. So, for example, we have in America we have the Bill of Rights. Well, that's taken from old, very, very old law in England, right? And the Constitution itself. Americans think Americans are funny. They say stupid things a lot. They say things like, well, America's great because we've got the Constitution. Well, about 180 countries in the world have got a written Constitution. One of the few that doesn't have a written Constitution, by the way, is England, Great Britain, because the law is so old in England, it's so well established that it wasn't written down as the Constitution from the beginning. In fact, that may have changed recently, but there's been many countries over the last sort of 50 to 100 years who have said, yeah, we need a constitution. We need to write down how our laws will work, at least on parchment or on paper. I say parchment because Scalia, a Supreme Court justice from old, famously referred to parchment in some of his explanations about how government works. But anyway, there are three branches of government, right? And I'm showing them on screen here. There's the president, who is the executive branch. That's one branch. There's the legislative branch, which is Congress, and there's the judicial branch, which is the court system. Ultimately, with the Supreme Court, but many levels of courts below that level too, right? Now, each of these branches have their own mini organization. So under the executive branch of the president doesn't wake up every morning and think about what he's got to do that day about diversity lottery. That's not what happens, right? So what the president does is he establishes, or every president has established and uses, a structure of departments, cabinet departments under the president to run various aspects of the government. I'll come back to that. I'll show you some of the departments. But there are various departments under the president, and there's kind of a hierarchy established as well. I'll talk about that as well. But there's a hierarchy of these departments that do various jobs. So, for example, the Department of Defense, now sort of stupidly renamed the Department of War, is under a cabinet member, a secretary who is Peter Hegseth. So, Pete Hegseth is in charge of that department, right? So you've got the president who nominates someone that he wants to do a job of running a department, and Congress have to approve that person that has been nominated by the president, and then that nominated secretary running that department runs the department and does all the stuff under that department, right? So Congress, I would argue, is supposed to be the most powerful part of these three branches. I've never really accepted the co-equal aspect of the description. Actually, you won't find the words. I don't think you'll find the words co-equal in the Constitution. They're not supposed to be co-equal. They're equal in their deference. They're equal in their position. They are uniquely important in each of their three rights, right? Each branch is important. But in terms of which branch is supposed to be or is more powerful, Congress is supposed to be more powerful. The president or the executive branch is not supposed to be more powerful, but in recent years, and it's not just Trump's fault, but in recent years, various presidents, both Democrat and Republican, have been increasing and pushing the power of the president's powers, right? And it's been kind of an unwise thing. And it's got a little bit out of control, obviously, under Trump. It's now gone completely out of control, frankly, under Trump, right? And so we've got the president who is supposed to implement what Congress says, right? So Congress set the laws, right? And the president, and through his departments, is supposed to implement those laws. And if anybody's got a complaint about that, they can go to the judicial branch, and they can complain about how how the laws are being implemented, right? So Congress, so the president elects or nominates cabinet secretaries and judges, right? He has the power to appoint judges. He has the power to pardon people, etc. The courts have the power to declare a presidential act as unconstitutional, as unlawful, right? And so anybody can actually go to the courts and start to argue that something that the government have done is against the law, unconstitutional. That's what unconstitutional means, against the law, essentially. The courts have that power, right? And so in theory, they can stop the president doing something. Although just recently, President Trump has basically been pushing on so many different aspects and doing so many things that are, frankly, unconstitutional. It's very difficult. It's like playing whack-a-mole, with trying to stop him doing all the stuff that he's doing. I think I said in last weekend's live session, in one sense, you have to admire this administration, because they're doing so much bad stuff that it's very difficult to stay angry and about one thing, because you could be angry about something they've done today, and then tomorrow they'll do something totally different, and you can get angry about that. But they're doing so many things every single day that so bad that it's very difficult to fight all those things, because every day there's a new scandal, every day there's a new bad decision, and they are completely bold in it, right? They're just very bold in their situation. And the government in general often they use phrases like this is a left-wing activist judge, to try and undermine the position of the judge that is trying to keep them in check, right? And so unfortunately many people buy into this crap. When you say things to me like that's fake news, that's mainstream media, and all this sort of thing, you're parroting. Often you're parroting, copying things that Trump has laid out there in order to undermine the institutions that are important. So whilst there's 3 branches of government, for example, it's often said that the 4th branch is the media, the journalism. Well, Trump very early on decided to make us all try and not trust the media, and coined this phrase of fake news. And so now, whenever a journalist says something, you've got loads of people who will just come out the woodwork saying, "Oh, that's fake news," right? Well, I'm just not going to believe that thing. Well, journalism used to actually be a pretty good way to understand what was going on, but social media and modern journalism has reduced that power, reduced that effect, and so now it's a bit of a mess, and everybody thinks they've got a right to an opinion on everything. We saw the same thing during COVID. Loads of people thought they were suddenly medical experts, and they knew what was best for everybody else's, everybody else's situation, right? Whereas medical experts are actually medical experts, right? Or when we're talking about the climate, 99% of climate scientists believe something, but those 1% of climate scientists that are trying to get us to believe something else, are very loud, and a lot of people believe the 1%. There are people that believe the Earth is flat, right? And I've had conversations and arguments with people who believe the Earth is flat, and you cannot tell these people that that there are many, many ways to prove that the Earth is actually round. It's a sphere. It's an oblate sphere, if you want to be precise. But anyway, it's round, right? And you can prove that in many, many ways. But there are still idiots that will argue till the cows come home that the Earth is flat, and you just can't. You can't talk to people that are so ingrained in a particular point of view like that, because they've been brainwashed. And this is what Trump has done. He's brainwashed people, right? And frankly, for a lot of the people, it was pretty easy to wash their brains because there wasn't much there to start with. But anyway, back to the picture. So there's a relationship there between the Congress, who are setting the laws, the president, who has to implement the laws on a day-to-day basis and is the chief executive of the country. And so the president is supposed to operate and enforce the laws. In this graphic, it says enforce the laws. I'm not sure that's exactly right. I think it's operate and enforce the laws. So, not all laws are enforced, but they're operated, right? And just to give you a flavor, when Congress is 2 houses, right? Congress is the House of Representatives and the Senate, right? So this was something that Scalia famously talked about. In other countries, like in my own country, we had 2 houses in the Congress there too. You've got Parliament, and then you've got the House of Lords. But the House of Lords is largely it's a superficial thing. It's not as powerful. It's stacked with old people that are, at least in the old days, people were made a lord, and they were lord for life. And some of them would go to sleep on the benches in the House of Lords because they're very old people, right? They've tried to modernize that, but essentially the power in the UK is more about Parliament as opposed to the House of Lords. So it is a two-house system, but not the same as America. America's two-house system is actually very separated. So, the House of Representatives is powerful and the Senate is also powerful. And in order to get a new law introduced, you have to put a bill through both of those houses and get approval in both of those houses. That makes it very difficult to get laws through, and it's deliberately difficult to get laws through. That's part of the, some would say, the beauty of the system in America. It is very, very complicated and difficult to get both houses to agree to things. There are 435 representatives in the House of Representatives. There are 100 senators. Roughly speaking, there's almost a sort of 50-50 split of Democrats and Republicans, and it's very difficult in that sort of environment to get new laws through. You've got two houses with almost equal splits, and stalemate is often the answer. Like, no decision is often the answer, which is why I've said to people in the past, it's very unlikely that immigration law will change anytime soon, because it's very, very difficult to get laws passed through Congress. Right? It's very difficult to make changes. And that's nothing to do with the president, right? The president simply is there to operate on the laws and enforce the laws and so on that are already on the books. It is true that the president has to sign a new law, but he can also veto a law, right? A veto means Congress could put forward a law that they both agreed, pass it to the president for signature, and the president, in theory, could say, I'm not going to sign that law. I'm vetoing that law. Well, that then goes back to Congress, and Congress can override his veto. So that is an indication of the true power of Congress compared to the president, right? And once a law is a law, then it's a law, right? And the president can't really alter that. Now, the president does things like announcing proclamations and executive orders, which is him interpreting the law and deciding, it should be, at least anyway, it should be, okay, him deciding, here's how I'm going to operate on a day-to-day basis the country based on the laws that we have from Congress, right? That's how it's supposed to work. Trump has obviously tried to push things and has tried to make, in my opinion, he's tried to change laws by executive order and proclamation. And that's where the courts come in to try and override what he's trying to do. So he can issue a proclamation that says anything he wants, like he tried to do the birthright citizenship one, and that was then taken to the judicial branch, to the courts, and argued there, right? So now, what's the point of this whole explanation? Oh, let me just tell you, by the way, let me just show you before I move on from that. Let me just show you the departments. These are the departments that are under the president. So the president has organized his work into various departments, and we have, like, let's just pick a couple of these. We've got the Department of the Treasury, right? This one here, which is obviously to do with all the money and the banking stuff. We've got the Department of Justice, which is where the FBI, for example, they're under the Department of Justice. That's a sort of where all the law enforcement happens, right? This is how the president does things. Again, the president doesn't wake up on a daily basis and decide, oh man, I'm gonna go and do something in the schools. I'm going to change something in the schools. What he does is he talks to his cabinet member for the Department of Education, right, and tries and implement changes in policy through someone who works for the president, right, the secretary in charge of the Department of Education in that case. So we have the Department of State, which is run by Marco Rubio, and then we have the Department of Homeland Security, which is run by Kristi Noem, right? And these are two names that you will have heard recently. In the UK lawsuit, when I was suing the government on behalf of UK entries, right? Anybody who won in DV25 or DV26 has, from the UK, has won because of my lawsuits. That's the only reason those winners were selected. When I sued the government, I sued, literally the paperwork was served on several people. It went to the director of KCC, which was, because they're the people operating the thing. It included Kristi Noem, because she's the leader of the Department of Homeland Security. And it included Marco Rubio, because he's the leader of the Department of State. The Department of State is the department responsible for running the DV lottery program. But the Department of Homeland Security is where USCIS falls under, right? And then finally, we also sued Trump himself. And so each of these people, 4 people, were served papers for the UK lawsuit by my lawyer, Curtis Morrison, right? And Curtis sent me a photo, I think of him actually going to mail those, the lawsuits to each of those 4 people. That literally happens. Those 4 people, obviously not them personally, but those 4 people are sued and named in the lawsuits, right? So this is how you go about suing, for something. Why would you sue? Well, you would sue that department, or a person, if you feel that they're not enforcing the laws that have been set out by Congress, right? So Congress have said in the past, we're going to do this thing called the diversity visa lottery. And in the law, it's in section 203C of the Immigration and Nationality Act, which is the law that controls the diversity visa program. It describes the broad parameters, the high-level parameters of how the diversity visa lottery will work, and how X number, we'll say 55,000 visas, are made available to people from various regions every year. And the diversity visa lottery has to be run within the fiscal year, and visas are made available. Now, note, I said you have to run the diversity visa lottery every year, and visas are made available. I did not say visas have to be issued, right? And I very deliberately didn't say that, because they have to run the lottery program, but they are not required by law to issue 55,000 visas or 52,000 visas or any other number, right? But they have to run the program. They make the visas available. And that is what's called a non-discretionary duty. You could call it, in some systems of government, you would call it a ministerial duty, I believe. This is a non-discretionary duty. It's a job they have to do. These departments, like the Department of State or the Department of Homeland Security or USCIS under the DHS and so on, these departments have to do certain things. They have a non-discretionary duty, right? One of those things is that they have to give people the right to apply for the available visas. It does not mean they have to issue the visas, though, right? And in the day-to-day operation, the government departments get to decide how to operate that program, right? They can say what's reasonable and what's unreasonable. We, on the other hand, can go to the judiciary at any point and say it's unreasonable for them to pause the program for 2 years. We could say that's unreasonable, and I would say almost certainly win that argument. It is unreasonable to pause the program and not do anything for a long, long period of time, right? And so the question is, though, when does a pause become unreasonable? When is an action or a duty that the government are supposed to do, when is it unreasonable for them to do it so slowly that it becomes actually you lose your chance, right? And that's for the courts to decide. It's not for the Trump to decide when it's unreasonable. It's for courts to decide. It also isn't for Congress to decide. And so Congress are not policing Trump on a day-to-day basis. They have some oversight authority, but they're not policing him on things like you're not operating the diversity visa program very well. Let's also remember the diversity visa program is a very trivial program in the big picture. You guys think it's the most important thing in the world. many of you genuinely believe that the president of the USA wakes up every morning and thinks about the diversity visa lottery. He doesn't, I promise you. He's barely aware of it on most days. It's just a very small part of the over-immigration budget or the overall immigration landscape. There are typically, in any given year, there's about 1 million to 1.2 million, roughly, immigrants that come into the country, of which 50,000 are through the DV lottery. So DV lottery is 5%, probably less than 5% of the overall immigrant picture in America, right? And immigration is just one policy amongst many policies that the government are dealing with, right? They have to operate the education system. They have to have the Department of Defense. They have to look after the roads. They have to prosecute people that are breaking the law and so on, right? They have to do all these things. And one part of what they do is they have to control immigration. And one very, very small part of the immigration control is DV lottery. So it's just not very important. And you guys, yeah, it may be the most important thing in the world to you, and I get why it is. I was there. I understand why it's important to you. My wife won the DV lottery, and I'm a derivative, or I was a derivative on her case. So I've been there. I understand why you think it's massively important, but it isn't massively important in the real big picture, right? It's just one little thing. And occasionally something will happen and somebody says something and it becomes more important, but it's not important on a day-to-day basis. Okay, so that's the big description. So what happened recently? Kristi Noem, immediately after the MIT and Brown attacks, this was a guy from Portugal, went out and killed a couple of people in Brown University and then went on to kill somebody in an MIT professor. This was an act of a personal grudge. It was nothing to do with terrorism or anything like that. But nevertheless, that particular guy got his immigration visa through the DV lottery program in 2017. He had previously been in the country under a student visa in the early 2000s, but then in 2017 got his visa through the diversity visa program. Kristi Noem, who is the leader of the Department of Homeland Security, and that's a very big department, by the way. It's not high on the ranking. These departments are ranked based on when they were established, which is why it says the date underneath these. Like State Department 1789, the Treasury Department also 1789, the Interior 1849. These dates are important. When the hierarchy of the government, there's a thing called the presidential line of succession. So if the president were to die, who's next in line? It's the vice president, right? Everybody can understand that. Who's the third person in line, right? The third person in line is actually the leader of the Senate, right? And the fourth person in line is the Secretary of State, the leader of this department, the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio. Right? Why is that fourth and not? And there are 80,000 employees of the Department of State, roughly, whereas there are about 250,000 employees of the Department of Homeland Security. Why is Marco Rubio, the Secretary of State, number 4 on the list of people to succeed and become the president? Well, that's based on when that department was established, right? So the Department of Homeland Security, I think, is 18th on the list. So if 17 people were to die, then Kristi Noem would then become the president automatically of the USA, right? But for Marco Rubio to become the president, it would only take the president, the vice president, and the Senate leader of the Senate, the pro tempore leader of the Senate, to have been killed. Let's say they were all killed in the same event, right? Then Marco Rubio would be the president. That hierarchy is somewhat important, and it's based on the date that the department was established. Okay, so when Kristi Noem came out on a couple of days after the Portuguese guy did that shooting, she immediately said, "I'm pausing the DV lottery program." This is back in late December, just before Christmas. She said, "I'm pausing the program." This was on a Thursday night. She just announced that. President Trump didn't announce that. Kristi Noem announced that, right? President Trump did not put out an executive order pausing the program. It was paused by the verbal statements of Kristi Noem. So she's powerful, but that actually only affected the operation of the diversity lottery in America. So the next day, Marco Rubio then made statements that he was going to follow suit, and he also paused the program. And since just before Christmas of 25, the diversity visa lottery has been paused by those two actions of two secretaries. The president still has not made a statement pausing the program. There's not been a presidential action. This is administrative actions by the two department heads, right? That's an important point for us to understand. So, that was the first pause. The second pause that just was put in place a few days ago and will be operating from 4 days' time. It becomes real from the 21st. That was put out by the Department of State, by Marco Rubio's department, and is the pause on 75 countries on all immigrant processing. It's not strictly speaking directed at DV lottery, but it does affect some people, or it will affect some people in DV lottery. So we have the first pause, which is against DV lottery, and that's now being paused by USCIS and Department of State, right? So that's whether you're in America or whether you're outside America, DV lottery is paused. So that pause is in place. And I've always believed that that pause will be temporary because this is an administrative action, right? So people have asked me, why am I so confident that the pauses would be temporary, right? And should we be suing, and all these sort of questions? And this whole explanation is to get you to a point where you understand my perspective, and you can think about this and you can apply your own thoughts to this to see whether you think you want to be involved in a lawsuit or not, right? So again, the government, the president has not paused the program. It's an administrative pause by the departments. So the departments are saying, in order to operate this program safely, this thing with this Portuguese guy happened, and so we're going to pause DV program while we figure out if there's any security holes in this program that we should go fix, right? And I think that to some extent, if you take that, if you could be in court tomorrow, and you couldn't, but if you could get to court tomorrow and you were in front of a judge is going to say, well, that seems reasonable. It seems reasonable and fair that they consider, is the program secure? Let's give them some time to do that. How much time do you want, government? And the government will say, hey, we need 30 days or we need 60 days or something like that. So let's just imagine that argument happened. 30 days or 60 days would be a reasonable point in time. If the government turn around and say, we need to pause DV lottery for 7 years, right? Then you would go to a judge and you say, hey, judge, I don't believe that's reasonable. And the judge would agree, hey, that's not reasonable. This is a non-discretionary duty you have to run the DV lottery and make a visas available. It's described in section 203C of the INA. You've got to do this, right? You have to do this thing. And it's not reasonable for you to pause that for 7 years, right? Is it reasonable to pause it for 30 days? Yeah, that's probably reasonable, right? I don't agree with it, but I'm talking about whether it would be defined as reasonable or not, right? If you will, or you may have heard about things called mandamus lawsuits. Mandamus lawsuits is where you go to a court and say, hey, this government official or these officials are not doing what they should be doing. They have a non-discretionary duty to do this. In immigration terms, it's like they've got a non-discretionary duty to adjudicate my case, right? And they're not doing that. They're just sitting on it. So I'm gonna have a mandamus lawsuit to make them. Mandamus means make them, right? Make them do their jobs, right? And adjudicate my case. I want the answer on my immigration case, whether it's yes or no. I just want the bloody answer, right? And so that's what a mandamus lawsuit is. In a sense, a lawsuit that could be filed now against the pause is sort of like that. It would sort of say, it would try and argue that this pause is now unreasonable, right? And for that reason, the question of what's reasonable, what's not reasonable is important, okay? Because if you go into court and you say, hey, it's unreasonable that they've paused the program for 7 days, no judge is going to say, no judge is going to say, well, 7 days pause. This is a 1 year long program. Why are you worried about 7 days? That's not unfair. It's not unreasonable for them to take a bit of time to make sure that they're doing something that's safe, right? And so 30 days is probably reasonable. 60 days is probably reasonable. 90 days starts to get a bit unreasonable. And so Curtis Morrison is going to file a lawsuit challenging on behalf of the DV 2026 people or plaintiffs that hire him anyway. He's going to try and challenge the DV 2026 pause, or the DV pause that was started by Noem and then followed up by Rubio, right? He's going to try and challenge that on the basis that he thinks it's unreasonable, right? And that's, that's a fair idea. It's fair to sort of do that, but the timeline of it is going to be quite slow. And that bit is probably going to shock you. You probably think this is going to be a quick thing and it can all be over by next weekend. It won't be. So Curtis Morrison has now announced two lawsuits that will go ahead. For the DV pause, it's open until the end of February, and then it will be filed in mid-March, March 14th, I think it is, or March 15th. When that lawsuit is filed, it then will go through a whole sort of legal process, and it would take, quite some time. It won't have an immediate effect, right? And so his lawsuit is necessarily delayed because you can't say it's unreasonable too quickly. You've got to actually wait until it really is unreasonable to complain about it, right? Or to some extent, you have to wait. Although the question of what's reasonable and what's not reasonable is a matter of opinion and debate, right? And so that's why you have to have that debate with a judge, not necessarily with a YouTuber, right? And so there will be that debate, but understand that lawsuit isn't going to go ahead it's not going to be filed until mid-March, which means it's going to be April, May, maybe June before we get any sort of answer on that. Curtis Morrison will certainly ask for an injunction. I would have thought he would ask for an injunction, which is an order from the judge to say to the government, "Hey, you have to stop that pause thing. That's nonsense. You can't do that. You're disrupting people's lives. You're taking away their opportunity. You have to stop that pause thing." Right? The judge could agree with that and could order that pretty quickly while further arguments happen. Right? But even if that were to happen, that's not going to happen until April at the very earliest, I would have thought. I'll have to ask Curtis about that. And I will, I'll try and interview Curtis and talk to him about this to see his opinion on how quickly an injunction could be issued. But what they will be arguing is that the government need to do their job. The government have to do their job anyway, right? And so my perspective is, I think the government, when they said they were pausing the program, because it didn't come from the president, it's an administrative thing that has come from the departments, right? And it is somewhat reasonable when they said they were going to pause the DV lottery program, somewhat reasonable. I mean, it's stupid. I'm not saying it's wise or anything. It's stupid, but it's somewhat reasonable, right? And so I think they were genuine in that statement. I believe that they meant for this to be a temporary pause, right? Now, the second pause then came along, and that's got more animus wrapped up in it, and I think that's actually an easier one to fight, in a sense. It's against 75 countries. The justification for it is wacky as hell. And Curtis Morrison is going to have another lawsuit for the 75 country pause. And that one, funnily enough, is starting later, but will file sooner. He's going to try and move faster on that particular one. But if you're a DV 2026 candidate, you're with Curtis, at least. I think he wants you to be in the DV 26, the DV lottery pause lawsuit, not the 75 country lawsuit. I'm not quite sure how he's going to operate that, but and I will ask him, but he sees those as separate things. Funnily enough, they're both similar in that they're a pause, right? And they're an administrative action or inaction. And so, you know, the arguments against both pauses are similar. So he's wise to have those two arguments. Definitely, it'll be useful for him to have those two arguments. But he doesn't want to connect the arguments. He wants to keep each argument separate so that he can focus on the particulars of that argument, right? So that's kind of interesting. So the lawsuits are going to challenge the pause and make the government do the job that they have a duty to do anyway. We may need the lawsuits. I don't know. I'm undecided. I think I need to literally have a conversation with Curtis Morrison and others, and I know there are going to be other lawyers challenging this as well. I spoke to the impact litigation team. They're also going to be filing a lawsuit in February on the pause or pauses, and so, you know, if you're wise, you may want to just sort of wait a little bit and see which lawyers are doing, you know, what sort of lawsuits, when those will be filed, who you believe would do best for you, what the costs are, and so on, right? So, you know, personally, I wouldn't be signing up to the lawsuit right now. I would be waiting until later. And for the DV lawsuit, it's open until the end of February and won't be filed until March. So why on earth would you jump into it right now? You wouldn't. I mean, you'd be silly to do that, to be honest. You should wait and understand a little bit more. And while we're waiting and understanding a little bit more, that pause may be removed. That literally might happen. So it would be unwise to commit to being in a lawsuit to fight something that may disappear anyway, right? Now, by the end of February or towards the end of February, that's going to be a different situation. You're going to want to then, you know, decide for yourself whether you want to be involved in that lawsuit or not. And also whether you feel that your individual rights would be protected best by being in the lawsuit or not being in the lawsuit. You know, because you may say, well, if a lawsuit goes ahead, I don't have to participate in that lawsuit to benefit from it. You may feel that way. In the past, we've had mixed results, whether you benefited or not, depended on whether you were in the lawsuit or not, right? So it's a very, very complex thing. And I really, what I want you to do is just like pause a little bit, if you'll forgive the pun, pause before you do anything stupid, before you take a decision, before you do something that you think is smart even. Just wait, right? Wait and see. Keep your powder dry, as they say. There's no need to jump just because someone says jump, right? Okay, so I will need to talk to you more about the lawsuits. I've been involved in a number of these lawsuits, right? And I feel I have some perspective on that I think would be valuable for some of you to hear. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a partner of Curtis Morrison. I'm not a partner of any other law firm, right? I'm not involved in these lawsuits from any point of view. However, in the past, in the DV 2020 lawsuits, I helped all of the lawyers with background information about the DV lottery to help educate them so that they could put good arguments forward. I have specialized expertise in this area. They are the lawyers. I've just got some expertise, right? So, but I've also been involved in those lawsuits, and I watched and I listened and I learned from how the judges actually sort of, listened to the arguments and what actions they took. So I think I have some experience that would be valuable for you to hear. And my first bit of advice is, look, I'm not ready I would not be ready. If I were you, I would not be ready to sign up into any lawsuit today. I think you would need to wait a little bit. And I'm sorry if that is annoying to the lawyers that want to form their participant list and so on. But I would personally, for my own good, I would delay my enrollment into those lawsuits until I knew a little bit more. It's only it's mid-January. The lawsuit is going to be open for another 6 weeks. It won't be filed until 8 weeks from now, right? Why have you got to jump fast? You don't have to jump fast just because someone said so, right? Now, will these pauses be removed? Or let's just talk about some of the sort of the questions some of you have had. Some of you have had for me. Some of you think I've got a crystal ball. I know some of you think that I have a time machine where I can go into the future and see exactly what will happen, right? I don't have a time machine. I don't have a crystal ball. Sorry if that's bad news to some of you. So many times my expectations, my predictions, my statements about what will happen in the future or what may happen in the future may turn out to be wrong, okay? So you have to understand that. You have to understand that I don't work for the government. I'm not a lawyer. I don't have special insight and special ability to see the future. I'm just like you, right? The opinions and the things that I say are just my opinions, right? I was actually criticized the other day. It was a bit hurtful. I was criticized by someone the other day because he said that I had somehow affected his chances in a negative way because of the things I say sound so official. They might sound so official, but it doesn't mean they are official, right? It's just me talking about things, and with the best will in the world, I want to be accurate, but I won't always be accurate, right? I won't always be able to predict things how they go. But people have asked me, what's the likely timeline for the pauses to be removed, right? So I'll give you my perspective on that. I think the DV lottery pause will probably be removed relatively soon. I don't think it'll make it to the end of February, in all honesty. I think it'll actually be removed before the end of February, but we'll have to wait and see. Take that with a pinch of salt. If it's still there towards the end of February, then a lawsuit, to my way of thinking, is probably a good thing to be involved with. But I would not be in a lawsuit. I wouldn't be enrolled in a lawsuit in mid-January when I can actually just stop and wait for a while and see, whether they're going to continue processing or not. What would I be waiting for? Well, things like the visa bulletins. We can see another visa bulletin before you have to make a decision about the lawsuit. It'll be interesting to see whether the visa bulletin number increases or not, right? Particularly in Africa and in Europe, to see whether those increase. And after the visa bulletin, do they continue to arrange interviews? They are arranging interviews right now for March. Interviews are going out. Now, think of how cold-hearted and mean it would be for them to tell people to prepare for an interview in March and go and do the medicals and all of those things, and then, and with the plan of never giving them the visa. I don't think the plan is to not give the visas out. I think the plan is to still give the visas out, which is why they're continuing to schedule interviews. And if the visa bulletin continues to move, that's also another sort of clue that shows how they're feeling about DV lottery, right? So we'll see another visa bulletin in about 3 weeks' time. Why don't you wait for that? In 3 or 4 weeks' time, we'll see more 2NLs going out, which will be for April interviews, right? Why don't you wait and see about that? See if that happens. If by mid-February it doesn't look like they're doing things, then maybe you want to participate in the lawsuit. It's just the way I would think about it if I were you. So I'm hoping that I've given you a bit of a perspective there about the DV pause. The 75 nation pause is kind of clumsy, and it's against all immigrant cases. That has pissed off a lot of people. while I was saying earlier, diversity is only 5% of the overall budget. By attacking those 75 countries, with this pause, and by making it on all immigrant cases, that's a lot of that 1 million people a year. That's a lot of those people are being affected by this pause. Generally speaking, the lawyers, most immigration takes years to go through. And so most lawyers have been saying, look, this is just a pause. Don't worry about it. Your case was going to take 3 years. Now, if the pause adds another 3 months on top of that, or 6 months on top of that, what's the big deal? Well, it's a big deal for diversity lottery, right? Because you have to have your visa approved by the 30th of September. If not, you lose your chance. There is no issuance of a visa after the end of the fiscal year. We've fought that. We thought we'd won on that basis, and then the appeal went against us, and so that has now been firmly established. You cannot extend these visas for issuance beyond the end of the fiscal year. So if you're DV26 and come 1st of October you don't have your visa for any reason, then it's over. You don't have any other way of getting that visa. It doesn't matter if you're a nice person, doesn't matter if you're on 221G, it doesn't matter whether you're on 221G for background checks or for a pause. Either way, you're never going to get that visa at that point, because they cannot issue that after the end of the fiscal year, right? So, bear that in mind. Okay, so I'm hoping you're getting a bit of a picture. By the way, I do think the 75 country pause, Curtis Morrison is going to file his case on that faster than the other case, and I think that's wise. It's much more egregious and affects more people, and so I suspect there'll be other lawsuits by other organizations on the 75 country pause. I suspect that will probably move faster. If other organizations, let's say let's just dream a little bit and say AILA or the ACLU or whatever filed a lawsuit against the 75 nation pause, that would be helpful for us if we had to do a lawsuit on the DV lottery pause, because many of the arguments will be the same arguments. The fact that it's a non-discretionary duty, it's a law. Do you remember going back to my picture about this, the way things are organized? Congress has established a law that says the lottery has to happen, right? And so if the departments under the president are not doing their job, then that's where we've got the right to complain to the court system, right? And so that's why I gave you the whole structure. This has been a very long-winded way. I've been talking for a long time, nearly an hour. It's a long-winded way of explaining to you why the program could or couldn't be paused and so on, and what will happen next and what we can do about things and so on. So, okay. I see a bunch of questions, so let's now sort of turn to questions and see if we got some questions here that are partly what I'm talking about here. Let's just talk about that. Oh, hang on, let me take this question first. Just pray that you're not part of the partial or total ban list, right? First of all, this partial ban thing. Right, the travel ban is on 39 countries. Some of those 39 countries are partially banned. From a DV lottery point of view, which is all I care about, a partial ban or a full ban is the same thing. A ban is a ban for those 39 countries. They're all banned, right, for DV lottery. The partial aspect, the partial word, is only on some non-immigrant visa types. But from an immigrant visa point of view, which includes DV lottery, they're all banned, right? So there are 39 countries travel banned. Curtis Morrison has very specifically said in his lawsuits, he's not going to try and attack the travel ban. The travel ban has been attacked before in the courts. And whilst the original travel ban went through 3 iterations, it was eventually allowed to stay. So the president does have the right under 212F, which is a part of the immigration law, to ban entry of people into the country from specific groups. And he's chosen to do that from 39 countries. And that's not going to change, right? So we got the travel ban, and that's very serious, and I don't think that's going to change for quite some time. And then we have the 2 pauses. The 2 pauses are not bans, right? And they're a pause in administration. They're not a travel ban as such. So we're talking about different things. But yes, this person says, even if the pauses are lifted, this is a true statement. Even if the pause is lifted and you're part of the total ban list, the 39 countries, you will not be issued a visa. That is 100% correct, right? If you're refused under 212F, that's it. You're refused, right? You're not gonna get around that, even if the DV lottery pause or the 75 country pause is lifted. Okay. Confusion says, I'm part of the 75 banned countries list. No, you're not. You're part of the 75 paused countries list. If we can't keep our terminology correct, we're going to get very confused in our conversations, right? A pause is not the same as a ban. A ban is not the same as a pause. Get it? Right? So no, you're part of the 75 paused countries list. I am seeing a lot. All right. Maybe it's not the time to immigrate to the USA for most. Yeah, that's possibly true. Most doors are closed except for Western Europe, Argentina, and some other. Wow, I don't know about Argentina. Good to see you. Long journey. Oh wow, Mustafa, thank you for coming back and seeing us. Let me see if I can. I want to go through and see if I can find some questions. So I'm going to go through fairly quickly. Right. Any news of DV27? Any plans on the applications opening up soon? May is around the corner. DV27 is entirely unaffected by any of this pause conversation, right? DV27 could be announced anytime now. We don't have an announcement of when it will be run yet, but it could be announced completely independently of this pause conversation or the travel ban conversation or anything else. It could go ahead. I don't have any idea on when that's going to be announced, but it could go ahead, right? If 75 ban remains, if the 75 pause remains, but the DV pause is lifted, how do you anticipate that will affect odds for people applying from the remaining eligible countries? Okay, so the scenario there is if the DV lottery pause is lifted, and what this person is asking, does that mean that if the 75 country pause is in place still, is that going to make things better for the other countries? To some extent. It's not a clean. And by the way, some of you will say this is a selfish question. Everybody has to think about themselves. And so to an extent, if you're not asking selfish questions, then you're kind of an idiot, right? You need to be selfish. You need to consider yourself. Now, I don't like people who are just selfish, but and don't think about other people, cannot empathize about other people. But on the other hand, as long as a question is asked respectfully and so on, it is important to have some of these conversations that might seem like they're selfish, but actually it's important to understand, right? So if there are 75 countries under the pause and the DV lottery pause is lifted, then there are people from other countries such as, I don't know, let's pick a few, France, Germany, Spain, and so on, that are not under the pause or any pause at that time, and they're not under the travel ban. And so in theory, those people might think, hey, I'm going to get a faster visa. The problem with that sort of perspective is that even the people for the 75 country pause are going to be scheduled for interview. Their DS-260s are going to be processed, and everything is going to happen because they're just being put on a temporary pause. That pause could be removed at any moment, either through a lawsuit or through the government's own decision. But in the meantime, all of the work still happens. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that because 75 countries are paused, and your country is no longer affected because the DV lottery pause has been lifted, it doesn't necessarily mean that your region or your country is going to go to the moon in terms of the visa bulletin. Doesn't mean that, right? There's some aspect of that, but not as much as you might think. It's not as black and white as you're thinking there. Okay. Let's see. If you've got good questions and you've asked them already, but you want to re-ask them, do that, because I'm scrolling down now. I'm not going to try and go back and see all these other questions that have been asked, right? What's your people who are hit with both the DV pause and the 75 country list? Should we pursue the lawsuit, given that we're also fighting against time? Yeah, so this is what I wanted to talk about and introduce the topic of the lawsuits and how the government runs. And I spent that first 50 minutes of this conversation talking about how it works so that you could understand where I'm coming from, right? And where I'm coming from is, personally at the moment, I would not be jumping into any lawsuit. I don't care who's filing it, what the strategy is or anything else. I wouldn't be jumping into any of the lawsuits. Now, that's only because I would want to wait for a little bit and see what's going on next, right? The way Curtis has set up the DV26 lawsuit is that to participate, it's a total fee of $2,500 per case. It's a per case charge, not for every family member. So if you've got 3 kids and your spouse on there, you're only paying one fee, right? It's one for the whole family. However, it's not all paid up front. $500 is paid up front, and the remaining $2,000 is paid if they win and if you enter the, well, no, let me put that a different way. The $2,000 is payable, and Curtis needs to describe this. I don't want to speak for Curtis. I'm not his business partner or anything else. But $500 is paid up front. That's non-refundable and is paid in every circumstance. The $2,000 is paid once you've entered the USA. There's some questions there about, well, do I pay the $2,000 if the lawsuit doesn't win, but the pause is lifted anyway? What if the pause is lifted before the lawsuit is filed, and so on? There's all sorts of questions about that. And you'll have to ask Curtis about those questions. It's not for me to answer questions like that for Curtis. It's his business decision, right? Nothing to do with me. But what I can tell you is that of the $2,500, $500 would be your commitment. Now, up front, right? And so to participate in the lawsuit, you're spending $500. That's not a nothing amount of money, but it's a very small amount of money when it comes to lawsuits. It's not a lot of money at all. Lawyers often will charge several $100s per hour, right? I'm just having some work done on my car at the moment. That's $2,000 for my car. To spend $500 on a lawsuit, it wouldn't buy you an hour's time with most lawyers, right? So, so $500 is not a huge amount of money, but it might be a very large amount of money to you in your country, right? And therefore you need to be careful and cautious about how you spend that money, right? And you're also committing to another $2,000 to be paid once you've entered the USA on a monthly basis and so on. But still, that's a lot of money too. And so you need to think about that, right? The only answer I can give to this question is, should we pursue the lawsuit given we're fighting against time? I get it. I understand about the time, but your participation in the lawsuit today is not going to speed up the filing of the lawsuit, right? So, and I'm talking about the DV lottery lawsuit, Curtis's lawsuit. It's not going to speed up because you jump in with both feet today. So the smart decision is to wait a little bit until we know more, right? Can I sponsor myself as an applicant? It's such a vague question. I'm not even going to bother with it. Okay. Since the new ban excludes many countries, doesn't that automatically bump up the DV lottery odds for everyone else? No, I've already explained that. Derivative from banned country, principal app from a non-banned country. Should the pause be lifted, does the principal app get the visa and not the derivative? No, principal app from a non-banned country. Now, the principal is from non-banned, so the case can be approved. The banned country derivative, that's a bit of a gray area to me. It may be different for children than an adult. I'm not entirely sure about that. I think you actually could, with an adult, I think you can get into a position where you would be banned even though your spouse is approved, and the kids would be approved because they take even if they don't have a non-banned passport. So it's complicated, but I haven't seen many cases where that is actually going through. That's one for the lawyers to really figure out, and also to see how the government treat it. Okay. What if the government also decides to move those 75 countries from a pause to a ban, knowing that there's nothing that can be done, not even a lawsuit? Yeah, so that's a possibility, right? If Trump wants to get involved and he wants to try and expand the ban, he could do that. Now, if he did that, because the travel bans are very broad, they're not just directed against TV lottery. If he did more banning, they'd be more likely that some large organization would sue him and we'd have another go at that. But the damage is done from a DV lottery point of view. So let's just hope that he doesn't expand the travel ban more to include those 75 countries. The justifications for the travel ban are explained. The justifications for the pause are explained. Neither one of them is a very good argument, to be honest with you. But nevertheless, the 212F has been tested, and it's a very difficult thing to attack, right? Okay. I'm from the 75 banned countries, paused countries. I have passed the lottery immigration interview and they issued me a visa, but after some days they called me and I found my visa is cancelled on my passport. Right. So the pause, both pauses, said that they wouldn't cancel or revoke any visas. However, there were instructions passed to the consulates that said if you have printed a visa, or if you haven't printed, if you've approved a case but you haven't printed a visa, and now you find that that's paused, then don't print the visa. If you've printed the visa, then cancel that visa if you haven't given it back to the applicant yet. And so that's probably what happened in your case. You were approved. Maybe your visa was printed. Maybe it was put into the passport, and then you were given your passport with cancelled without prejudice written all over the visa, which means it's cancelled, right? If you had your passport given back to you before the pause and you have a visa, that visa is still valid, right? If the visa hasn't been cancelled, That was annoying. So, guys, I'm sorry if I think I was just offline for a couple of minutes there. So I'm sorry. I'm gonna have to invest in a new laptop, I think. Everything's paused, even Simon's stream. You guys are funny. I think the FBI probably just turned off my internet or something. And we're back. Yeah. Even discussing about the pauses being paused. Oh dear. Yeah, it's annoying. Okay, so let me just get back. Apologies for that. Are you a fast cyclist? Somebody's just asking, am I a fast cyclist? I'm a fat cyclist. I don't know about fast. I had an interview that told me to, until the pause is lifted, how long should I wait to go to court? We have to, I think we should just wait for everything, to be figured out over the next few weeks, right? Okay. Where we are. Your intuition on when the 75 country pause can be lifted. That one, I don't know. That's supposed. There was a statement made by the ambassador or the president of some country, I can't remember, who spoke to the ambassador, and he was told and published that 75 country pause would be in place for about 60 days. Whether that's true or not, who knows? We have to just sort of wait and see. So follow-up question here. So let me just see, Raju. Let's see. Could I please elaborate on the historical situation where you mentioned here there was some benefit seen for those who had participated in the lawsuits? Yeah. There was in the DV 2020 and DV 2021 lawsuits, there was a lot of conversation and a lot of angst, frankly, about whether it was better to be a named plaintiff or not, whether you should be in a class action or not. Now, Curtis Morrison has said that the group lawsuit that he's going to file for DV pause and the 75 country pause, I believe neither one of those are going to, they're not going to attempt to make a class action. A class action says, one of the cases that we did in Gomez was like this in DV 2020. In DV 2020, the way that lawsuit started was I was contacted by Jesse Bless, who was the director of litigation at AILA at the time, and they were interested in putting in a lawsuit against the government, the government's handling of the COVID crisis and not issuing visas to people during COVID. It was during a period of ban. All immigration was shut down, so it was a powerful ban. But the principal argument was, while we accept that you can ban someone from entering, we believe you should be issuing the visas, right? So in DV 2020, there was a lawsuit called the Gomez lawsuit that was started, and I helped the lawyers create the original interest list for that, right? So I helped by using my platform. And I got around about 1,000 people who wanted to participate in the lawsuit and be named plaintiffs on the Gomez lawsuit. In the end, they took a representative number of people from that 1,000. I think it was like 7 or 11 people or something. And they used those representative names as representing the rest of the people, in the class. And they went for a class. It was the action that they fought for was to apply to not only the 7 or 11 people, but also everybody else that was in the same position, right? Piggybacked from that, or separately to that, depending on your perspective, various other lawyers filed their own private lawsuits, and they had named plaintiffs in their lawsuits, which were individuals that had paid to be on that lawsuit. And there was various perspectives about whether it was better to be part of the class in the class action on what was the original Gomez lawsuit was a pro bono case, meaning it was free to participate in that lawsuit, and it operated for free, although it was hugely expensive. Jesse Bless and others put in thousands of hours of time on that, and it was hugely expensive. But they didn't charge for that. Meanwhile, Curtis Morrison and other lawyers did other private lawsuits where they were charging for their time, and but Curtis has always been very clear that he fights for his plaintiffs. He's not necessarily fighting for everybody else. He's fighting for his clients, right? And so that's a perspective that you have to be aware of. When he fights for something, he's fighting for what's best for his clients. And if that means he's going to make a decision on behalf of the people that are paying him, then so be it, right? That was his perspective. Whereas the Gomez lawsuit was fighting for everybody. And in the end, in DV 2020, we got a good win for everybody through the Gomez lawsuit, and the other private lawsuits were sort of put together with that main lawsuit. So, you know, you could argue this both ways. Is it better to be a participant on a lawsuit or sit back and not be a participant? Is it better to be named on a lawsuit and so on? You have to take your own decision about that. It's not a simple one-size-fits-all answer on that one, I'm afraid. Okay. Bye, says Lucas. Oh, sorry. Bye. Lost audio and video. Did your opinion on the DV pause being a short one change at all recently, or you still stick to it? I still stick to it. There's been nothing that has developed that has shown that that's going to be a longer pause. In fact, the actions of the government actually tell me that I was right to assume that would be a relatively short pause. By scheduling people and continuing to do the work that they do, to me, they are showing us that they intend that to be a short pause. You can disagree with me if you like about that. That's up to you, but that's my perspective. Do you think it's likely that we'll see significant developments one way or the other with DV27 prior to the filing of these lawsuits? If so, why? I don't know what you're getting at there. You'd have to be a bit more specific about your question. I don't know what you would mean. Captain Orange is just a silly chap who acts without thinking. Chaos everywhere. That's true. DV25 winner entered on December 24th, 2025. Received SSN. Now waiting for green card. I'm on 75 list. Will the green card be delayed? I've heard conflicting comments about this. So Noem came out and said she was going to delay issuance of green cards. It's kind of silly that she would do that, or that she would tell her department to do that. And then I've heard some people who have received green cards. In fact, I've got a green card sitting on my shelf there, waiting to be sent to someone. I need to speak to someone about that to send it to him. But I think they have been sending green cards. So, you know, forget the 75 list thing. The 75 list doesn't apply to USCIS at the moment. So it shouldn't be delayed for that, but it may be delayed. It may not be delayed. We don't quite know about that at the moment. Okay. You skipped my question. Yeah, probably. From the 75 pause countries, I passed the interview. They accorded me a visa, but then after some days, they called me and I found my visa is cancelled. Yeah, I explained that. You got the visa, but I was in the middle when my laptop decided to go to sleep. I was explaining that if you received your visa back and it's got cancelled without prejudice on it, then it's cancelled, right? And all you'll have to do is wait until the pause is over, and then they'll reissue that visa. Okay. Next, Trump will invade South Africa. Don't even joke. It might happen. Hi, Simon. One more question. What if I continue going for an interview at Nairobi, since my country, South Sudan, is on the ban list? I guess they may put my case on 221G. I received 2NL for February interview. If you're in the travel ban list, right, you've got to be really clear what you're saying here. If you're in the travel ban list, and I haven't got all the lists, and now we've got 2 lots of pause and 1 travel ban, right? So if your country is on the travel ban list, you're not going to get the visa, and you're not going to. It's not a pause; that's a ban, right? If your country's on the pause but not on the ban list, then I would go for an interview if you're on a pause but not the ban list, right? But if you're on the ban, I don't know why you would go to the interview at all. I think that's just going to be a waste of your money, to be honest with you. Thank you, Han. So you need to make a sensible decision about that for your own sake, right? What are the chances that Congress could just cancel the DV entirely? I spent 50 minutes of this live session explaining why that's not really easy to do, right? Congress is 2 houses. They are split almost equally between Democrats and Republicans. They argue a lot and they get very little done, and they have very little agreement. It's very difficult for them to pass laws. Even really simple laws like paying for the government. The Congress have the power of the purse, right? So Congress control the spending of the government, and even simple things like paying for all the government activities, even that's an argument, and that's why the shutdown happened just before Christmas, right? So getting them to agree on new immigration changes is very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. Even after the midterm elections will happen later on this year. The Democrats will probably take power in Congress during those midterm elections because people are really unhappy with the Trump administration and how he's doing. His approval ratings are really low at the moment, and that is important because that will affect the midterm elections. So the Democrats will gain some power, but unless they gain both houses with a decent majority, then it would still be very difficult to get any sort of reform through on something as big as immigration. Very, very difficult indeed. My country is so slow about sending 2NL interviews, so I'm thinking of going to another country. I know it's hard, but the problem is how long this pause will stay, a month, 2 or 3. Yeah, we just don't know. It's really difficult to make a decision like your decision that you must make, right? So yeah, I get you. I know someone who had their interview on the 13th of January in Cameroon. Really? She was told that she's going to be called to collect her visa after the pause has been lifted. Okay. Interesting. I didn't know of any DV lottery cases being interviewed in Yaoundé, but tell me more. I have a high case number, AF82K from Monrovia, Liberia, but I live in India now. When I become current, will US Embassy Monrovia be good for my interview, or US Embassy Mumbai by capacity? Probably Mumbai would be better. Liberia is going to be, sort of more or less dealing with a capacity number that they can handle, and you're probably going to be better off in Mumbai. But in previous years, it's been much easier to sort of prove that and figure that out because we had the SEAC data, and we now are getting much more limited SEAC data. We see cases that go dark, but we don't see very much. Let me just briefly show you that, actually. TV charts. Let me just show you the latest update. There we go. Screen. Entire screen. Why is that? There we go. Right. I wanted to show you this. So if you can see this this screen, let me just make this bigger. Yeah. Okay. So for each of the regions, you can see what's happening. You see the dark color there. That's when cases go dark, right? And you can see that there are dark cases, all the way through the range now, up until here where we see these blue cases. These blue cases are in transit. So these are cases where the 2NLs were sent over the last few days. And when the extract of data happened yesterday, there were cases that were dark and there were cases that were in transit. But after that point, we don't have the status. Once the case has been accepted by the embassy and it turns to ready, or it's been interviewed, we're now losing that information, and that's when cases are going dark. So over time, more and more of the information is going dark. The only thing that we're able to see is roughly where the case numbers are getting to for the region, but we're not able to see which embassies now are taking those cases. And so we're going blind slowly with the SEAC data. You can see that in Africa. In Asia, you can see there's a lot of activity right up until the latest numbers. So case numbers as late as Asia, 25,000 are being interviewed. They're being scheduled. So that's good for Asia. For EU, you can see there's very little activity after about, after 11,000. The highest case number current is 11,000, of course, but the highest case number that is actually scheduled, I think, is 10,700 or so. So there are some embassies who are almost without backlog. To me, that means that EU should move in its number next visa bulletin. If it were not to move in the visa bulletin next visa bulletin, that would tell me that there's something about the pauses stopping that number moving, and so that would be a bit of a clue, right? Because we can see that there are embassies being scheduled up until 10,700, I think is the latest case I saw. For Oceania, again, we're right up to date. Oceania is operating well at an embassy level, but cases are going dark. South America, same thing. Cases are going dark. The cases going dark is a good thing and a bad thing. It means that those cases are actually being issued or put on 221G or whatever. Not issued at the moment, 221G. But at least interviews are happening, right? The in-transit cases shows that interviews are being scheduled for March. March interviews are already being scheduled, right? So that is happening. So we can get some information from SEAC, but not as much information as we've been used to in the past. Okay, let me take a couple more questions and then we'll probably call it a day. But so ask any sort of last important questions you have. You can also ask me questions, by the way, directly at britsimonsays.com. Okay, you can always go to britsimonsays.com and ask me a question there. Okay. I already got a visa and entered the US by 31st December because my case number was 3K. I'm still waiting on my social security number. Will I have any problems getting the green card or no? No, you'll be fine for both things. They'll come in time. The social security number is more important for you to get, frankly. The green card is not really important at all because when you entered the USA on 31st of December, your immigrant visa was stamped, endorsed, and it now shows your status for the next year. So as long as you get the green card at some point in that next year, you're fine. It doesn't matter. You've got proof of your status already in your passport. So the green card, people worry about the green card, but it's really not necessary to worry about it. Okay. You never understand my questions, lol. Try and make them really clear, Caribou. I can't read your mind. I'm really good at answering questions if I understand the questions, but I can't read your mind. Do you think the 75 country pause will be short as the DV pause or not? Yeah, I think so. I think I've explained that in this video. Now for the DV lottery, will people get the visa? Not during the pause, right? If the DV pause is lifted and 75 countries pause isn't lifted, will DV selectee from the 75 countries pause will be able to get the visas? No, they'll be paused, right? From what you just said. You answered your own question, right? And a question that you can answer for yourself isn't a question worth asking me. So, if they're paused for DV lottery and that pause is lifted, then that's good. But if they're still paused by the 75 country pause, then they can't get issued, right? They'll have to wait for that one. That's pretty obvious, isn't it? How can we join the lawsuit with Curtis Morrison? You can look at his website is Red Eagle Law. You can Google that and find Red Eagle Law and look for his interest lists or look for his registration. Okay, but I am going to do Curtis contacted me the other day and would like to do a one-on-one interview with me to talk about that. That's a good thing for everybody to participate in and everyone to listen to. So we will do that. It's good for Curtis. I'm grateful that he'll take his time to do that. It will also, be useful for him to widen his net, right? So, I get a lot of people watching my videos. So a video with Curtis would obviously get good watch numbers, right? So yeah, I'll be doing that over the next few days. I've just got to arrange a time with him. Yeah. If the travel ban stops many DV26 visas, will they draw again more people to reach 55,000 visas? No, they won't. Firstly, it's not 55,000 this year. It's about 52,000 visas available. And no, they wouldn't draw again. It's too late for that. It's too late for another draw. Where they do a second draw, it happens earlier in the year, about September or October. There is no reason why they would draw those now, right? So the pause. Hi, Lucas. The pause will definitely end before March. You can't issue immigrant visas in one category and not the other when you go through the same security vetting and checks for the other 75 pause. Yeah, I agree. I'm kind of, Lucas, this is fundamentally why I'm sort of like nervous about the lawsuits in a sense, because the lawsuits can't be filed too quickly, because it's not right to complain about a delay, when it's such a short delay, right? So you have to wait until the delay becomes difficult or unreasonable, and this is the key word: reasonable or unreasonable, right? And that necessarily means that the lawsuits need to be delayed, at least for the DV lottery lawsuit. I think it needs to be delayed. And Curtis is suggesting stating he's promising to file that lawsuit on March 14th. But I think it'll be over by then. So, I don't know. Curtis would not agree, by the way. I'm absolutely 100% sure Curtis would not agree, and he may be right. He and I had a little bet going last year, and he won that bet. About when DV 2027 would be announced, he won that bet, right? So I'm not always right, and he's always wrong. It's not at all like that. He's sometimes right, but he tends to take a pessimistic view because he's a lawyer and because he earns his living that way. I'm not earning my living by talking to you. This is not how I earn my living. He has to be pessimistic because it's the pessimism and it's the negative aspects that he has to fight on a daily basis. That's what he has to do, right? But I'm going to take a slightly different view on that, I think. And so, yeah, it's a little bit difficult, right? Okay, let's see. Is there a probability that the amount of provable liquid savings for a single is there? Oh dear. There is going to be a change to the public charge, evaluation. I think there was a memo that was leaked some time ago that talked about the public charge requirement and that being varied, and it actually said that the I-134 was going to be discontinued from being used in DV lottery cases. I'm not sure that's strictly speaking true yet, but we'll have to see. But I think it is quite likely that the public charge rules will undergo some sort of change. That's what the 75 country pause is about, essentially. They've dressed it up as being to do with public charge. And that's kind of bizarre and kind of stupid because there is already protections in the law for all immigrant cases, including DV lottery and all the other immigrant cases, so that people won't become a public charge. And if they do become a public charge, for most of the people that the 75 country pause is affecting, for most of those people, they have to be covered by an I-864, an affidavit of support, which is a contractual obligation with someone in America who can be sued for any costs incurred by the immigrant by the government, right? So the government can sue the sponsor. That's not the case for the I-134, which is used in DV lottery cases, but it is the case for the I-864. And so it's a legally binding contract. So there's already this public charge argument that is the basis of the 75 country pause. That's kind of nonsense. There's also law that says you can't get certain types of welfare in the first 5 years of being here. You're not entitled to enroll in Medicare or for several years after being here. And so it doesn't make a lot of sense, but they don't have to make sense in order to cause pain. Will there be a second draw? No. This is the first person I'm aware of as well who has been called in Yaoundé. I still haven't received my 2NL and have been current since the bulletin of January was released, and Yaoundé is really slow. I suspect that might not have been a DV lottery case, FYI, but we'll see. My visa is still valid and not marked as cancelled in my passport, but my CX status shows refused with a generic 221G notice. My visa expires in June. What's the best action for my case? Whoa. Yeah, I don't know. I would probably want to speak to a lawyer if I were you, and see whether you should try entering on that visa. Basically, the reason that they don't want to issue visas to people during the bans, when there is a ban, is because holding the visa is very difficult for them to stop at the border. And they probably will admit to you, so what will happen is you'll go to the airport to get on a plane. The airport staff and the airline will look at your visa and say you're entitled to enter the USA. So you'll then, you'll be put on a plane. You'll be allowed to go on the plane, and when you get to border patrol at the other end, they will probably also admit you. So it's a bit weird that they've given you the visa without the words cancel without prejudice. That's kind of weird. If that causes a problem at the airport when you arrive, you need to have a lawyer on speed dial, which is why you should probably talk to a lawyer before you come, right? Don't take it from a YouTuber, for crying out loud. Have it, because you can't call me when you've got a problem. So if I were you, I would check with the lawyer and make your plan whether you want to try and use that visa or not. Okay, but normally you would use the visa, right? Because the visa is valid unless it's cancelled. What will be the best reasonable start date before the lawsuits could be started for DV27 in your opinion? I don't know. I think they should have started it already. So I don't know what they're doing. Can the cutoff number be affected in Europe, considering that many countries in Europe are still in the pause, but they still be scheduled? Yeah, that's the thing. So the embassy sets its capacity, right? The embassy says we've got enough capacity to see 50 people from DV Lottery this month. And they say that every month, right? KCC are scheduling cases, whether those cases will be affected by a pause or not. And the travel ban, they're scheduling all of the cases, whether they're banned or paused from the 75 or paused from DV Lottery. They're scheduling all of those cases. Then when you go for the interview, whether you get a visa or not depends on whether there's a pause or a travel ban or whatever else, right? That affects your particular case. And so the capacity is still being used. The embassy capacity is still being used. So it's not necessarily true that the visa bulletin will go faster because lots of people are banned. It's not necessarily true, because many of those people will still attend their interviews, and the government actually wants them to attend their interviews, right? And wants them to attend their medicals and so on. So, it won't have quite the sort of the speed up effect that you think, okay? Or that some might think. Regarding the issue of being a public charge, is there a probability of maybe a minimum amount of provable liquid savings being set per person for the upcoming DV27? I don't think they'll put that in a quantifiable amount. For many years, I've been talking about $10,000 per person as being roughly the sort of amount of money you should show in order to avoid being considered a risk of public charge. But that number will change year to year. So I don't think they're going to come up with a number and say, yeah, you've got to have this amount of money. It's sort of like the bonds that they've done, but the bonds did actually have a fixed amount. So they've said from various countries you have to file a bond that will be forfeited if you overstay your visa and that sort of thing. And the bonds were like $5,000, $10,000, or $15,000. But this is not exactly the same. An immigrant visa can't be treated in the same way, right? It's a little bit different. As a man who is excellent at facts and figures, can I get stats and data on whether immigrants from poor countries are indeed more likely to become burdens to the state? There's no such thing. No, it's kind of nonsense. The whole premise of the 75 country pause is based on this public charge thing that says more people from those countries are likely to become public charge. There's no data to back that up. There's, it just isn't, because it's not even a thing. Because all of those people, so if you immigrate to America tomorrow through DV lottery, you're not entitled to claim, federal welfare. You might get some state assistance programs, but you won't get federal welfare. So you're not entitled to that. So to give data on how many people use the welfare doesn't make sense, because those people are not entitled to enroll in those programs. So there is no data. I mean, it's just nonsense. The whole thing is nonsense. Will they have enough time to do background check when people apply? I guess they might change the way the background checks are being done. I think you're probably talking about DV27 perhaps. But again, you're not really being clear. You got to be clear. We have data here in the UK, and sadly, many of the newly paused countries that are top stats for benefit claimants, being brown, has nothing to do with it. The figures don't lie. What happens in the UK about benefits is obviously a different thing, right? You might be able to say, in general, people from this country or that country are more likely to be benefit, claimants in the UK. That doesn't necessarily correspond with what will happen in America when there is no benefits they can claim, right? It's just a different thing entirely. But yeah, I sort of see your logic, but kind of doesn't make sense. So maybe the figures don't lie, but the figures are about a different thing. So, I don't know how useful that is. Glowing with positivity. Am I? Really? Hi, Brett. I'm currently on visa bulletin interview. Also scheduled. I have some details to change on the DS260, employment, and some other information. What is the procedure? Once you've been scheduled, you can't change those bits of data through KCC. They won't unlock anymore, right? So the best thing to do is, in the interview, they will typically start off the interview and ask you, is there anything on the on the DS260 you want to change? And that's the time when you can raise certain things that you have to change. But there's no need for you to modify your employment history or, because you changed your job. There's no need, right? That's a trivial matter. It doesn't matter. If you got married, then that's obviously very important, and you should be trying to make that change as quickly as possible in the interview or before, ideally. If you had a kid, that's important, but things like you changed it. What are you saying you're going to change? Employment. Yeah, nobody cares. Like, forget your employment. Like, nobody needs you to update your employment history on your DS260 in the interview. So just forget it. Jack, my visa issued in December is still valid, not marked as cancelled in my passport, but CX state. Oh, you've already said that. Yeah, I already told you, call a lawyer. How soon after activation trip is one required to file taxes in the next season? If you entered in 2025, even if it was on 31st of December 2025, then you have to file tax for the 2025 tax year, which is generally that's going to be by April 15th of the following year. You have to file that tax. You can, now it doesn't mean you're going to pay any tax necessarily, but you do have to create a tax report, right? And you do want to do those things, because whether or not you filed your taxes is one of the questions that will come up at your naturalization interview in 5 years' time, right? So you want to make sure you follow all the rules, right? Okay. If somebody is refused under 221G, is that visa still allocated to them? E.g., if the DV pause is lifted before the 75 country pause, could someone from an unpaused country take the place of the other? Good question. So there is some difference of opinion in this a little bit. So there is a process where every month the embassies have to report what they've done with the visas. And so at the beginning of the month, they set their capacity for the following month, right? Then KCC sets up all the interviews, and that embassy has to report at the end of the month saying, okay, we were given 25 cases this month to interview. Of those 25 cases, that was 53 visas, right? So essentially they've been allocated with 53 visas, and they then have to account for those 53 visas. They will say, we issued 47, we denied 3, and we've put 3 on 221G. Those 6, the 3 on 221G and the 3 on refusal, could have been used by the embassy during that month to allocate to other cases that were coming out of 221G. Could have been used, right? But if they weren't used in that way, then those 6 visas are returned to KCC at the end of the month, and therefore can be reallocated to other cases, right? So the answer to your question is no, they're not. The 221G cases will, after a certain point in time, they will lose those visas as an allocation. And then there's a delay when those cases need to be issued later because the 221G is done with. There's going to be a 1 or 2 week delay while KCC then reallocates visas for those cases. That is going to happen when the DV pause is lifted, right? And there will be a delay. It won't be an immediate thing. You won't see the pause is lifted on a Monday afternoon, and on Tuesday morning the embassy starts sending out the visas because they don't have the visas at that time. They have to allocate them, and they'll get them from KCC. So yeah, that's a good question, Joe. Thanks for that. Okay, so you're already being asked this question. How likely will the State Department resuming DV27? Right, for the first 50 minutes of this live, I explained how the law works and how DV Lottery 2027, being a part of a non-discretionary duty, will go ahead. Right, it's already been stated by the government that they do intend to operate DV 2027. It's just that the entry date is not announced, right? But DV27 has to happen between October 1st of 26 and September 30th of 27 in terms of the interviews. So they have to do the entry period at some point between now and then, right? So, we have to wait and see when that will be. I'm eligible based on my work experience, which is why I'm requesting to update my employment details. Okay, so that's going to be something where they're going to ask you about your employment. It won't necessarily be updated into the DS-260, but you're going to have to prove your employment history, separately, right? So it's not really about the DS-260. It's about what you're going to have to do to qualify for the visa. Why Trump don't want us to come to the United States? Because Trump's an asshole, quite simply, and he's appealed to a lot of other assholes. There is a perspective from some people in America that immigrants are coming to take the jobs from Americans. If you're an uneducated, poor white person in this country, and there are a lot of people like that, a lot of uneducated, poor white people, right? They have been brought up to believe that it's the other people's fault, and for a long time, they were told, you're an uneducated, poor white person, but it's those uneducated, poor black people that are your problem. That's the reason that you're poor, because those black people took your jobs, right? And now Trump came along, and Trump took that basic group of stupid people that are uneducated and poor and typically white, and he was able to become their leader and speak for them because he's given them groups of people that he said were bad people and they're taking all of your opportunities. So he's talked about immigrants as being bad people that take the opportunities. These poor white uneducated folks are stupid as hell, and they're not going anywhere in life anyway, right? It's not because of immigrants coming in taking their jobs. It's because they're useless and they're living in stupid places miles from anywhere useful. They're and they're too stupid to be able to do anything useful, right? That's the people we're talking about. I'm being perfectly honest, and it probably sounds like I'm being disrespectful, but I'm being factual. The demographics of the average MAGA supporter is a lower educated white poor person. That's it. That is literally the demographic, right? And so why are those people poor? Why, and it's because they're uneducated and they're generally white. And because they're generally white, it's easy to point them the enemy in terms of brown people as being the reason that they're poor. That's why, right? It's just racism. That's all it is. And Trump built an empire on the back of that racism. It's a very easy way to bring people together. If you can bring a group of people together, and 30% of the country came together because they're in that demographic I just mentioned. 30% of the people got behind him straight away, and then it didn't take very much for him to get the other 20% he needed to get 50% of the people, right? Because the other 50%, maybe they weren't uneducated white poor folks, but they were maybe they leaned conservative and they didn't want abortion. Maybe they were they were made to worry about trans athletes, and they didn't want their daughters to be competing against men for the 100 meters school race. And so they were told that they were given all of these silly examples of things they should worry about, and because of those things that they should worry about, they were told there was one party that was going to fix that and the other party was going to make that worse. That's how Trump came to power. That's it. So there you go. When will the US visa processing pause for Liberia end? Why was Liberia included among the 74 countries despite decades of long bilateral ties with the United States? I don't know, and I don't know. I don't know when it will end. I've explained that many, many times in this conversation. I don't know why Liberia was included. I don't know why the whole 75 country thing was put together anyway. It's like a bunch of nonsense. So you're asking impossible to answer questions. I emailed KCC yesterday to know if my DS-260 has been processed, and yet this was their response. Your forms have been received and are currently processing. After several weeks for processing, allow blah, blah, blah. Right, so you're still processing, right? You're not... is it a positive response? You said, well, they're still processing, right? I've already said during the pause, everything happens, right? All of the DS-260 processing continues. The interviews are scheduled. The interviews happen. What doesn't happen is nobody's given a visa at the end of the interview. That's it. That's the only part that isn't happening. Everything else is happening. The preparations for DV-27 are happening. The scheduling of interviews, that's happening. The visa bulletin has moved. All that's happening. Everything is happening. Everything is working. Everything's continuing. The only thing that isn't continuing is the issuance of visas. Okay. Okay, for the high EU case number in DV-26, would we basically need the main DV pause to be lifted? Yeah, you need that. And the 75 country pause to remain in place in order to have a chance? No, not really. That's not the whole thing for the reasons I gave earlier. As I already said, the 75 country pause doesn't necessarily mean that there's a free runway to the unpaused countries, because the 75 country pause people still... the pause will probably be removed, and they're still being scheduled for interview and so on. So, the work is still happening. I benefited from the DV 2020 lawsuit, but had ongoing masters ongoing in the UK. I did not make the greater than 6 months out of the 1 year, but I did not file taxes for that year. What effect does that have on naturalization? you need to go back and file taxes for the year that you missed, right? If you've missed a year, you need to talk to an accountant and you need to make sure you filed, right? When you go for naturalization, the filing of taxes for every single year is important. When I went for mine, I literally had to show that I had filed taxes in every year, and they have access to that information. So yeah, you've got to fix the tax situation. Don't be out of the country for longer than 6 months at the moment. Although you can be out of the country for up to 12 months and still legally be allowed back in, with this administration, it's not worth taking that risk. So come back in between 0 and 6 months every time you leave the country. Make sure you're back within 6 months. Okay. You are honest and saying truth, Britt. Thank you, Jason. How's everything? Been a long time. Just getting ready for college. Good for you. Through Jan, yeah, indeed. Good for you. Taken, right, a couple more questions here, then we call it a day. I've got to get on the road. I'm a DV26 from a partially banned country on the 39 list, but not on the 75. I'm already in the US. Am I eligible for AOS if the DV pause is lifted? If you are already in, so basically, yes, as long as you were in the country before the travel ban is your problem, or was your problem. But if you were already in the country, then you weren't affected by the travel ban. And so you're exempt from the travel ban because you were already here, right? So yes, but you do then need the pause on the DV lottery stuff to be lifted. So that's what you need to happen. But that doesn't mean you can't file. You can file. You can submit your I-485 once you're current, or announced to be current. And you can do all that background work, and then when the pause is lifted, you'll be issued, right? I'm just going to ignore one or two of these questions. Who wants to know? Oh dear. Who wants their daughters to be in a dressing room with a confused male person? In your country, you would be arrested for saying the things you say now if you mentioned Starmer rather than Trump. You people are so funny. No, I wouldn't be arrested in the UK for having free conversation or an opinion. And no, I wouldn't be arrested in America. And I'm certainly not. I don't believe I've got more freedom of speech in America than I had in the UK, funnily enough. But freedom of speech has never included, either in Britain, my own country, or in the USA. Freedom of speech has never allowed hate speech, right? And so when you argue for people to have the rights, that's very rarely a position that is taken as being problematic. It's when you try and stop other people from having rights that the situation is more problematic. So what you're talking about is the opposite of what would happen. And as for your point about daughters in a dressing room with a confused male person, you're buying into a bunch of nonsensical bullshit, and you're being brainwashed, and there's a little worm in your head that is convinced all this stuff is happening. Just, if you're a guy, right, with police or something, if you're a man, go and ask women that you speak to on a daily basis and ask them how many times they've been in a public restroom and bumped into a man, right? It doesn't happen. You're a complete numpty if you think. Let me just show you something as well. So let's see, TikTok, Goose. No, I won't spend too much time on it. But I've got 3 daughters. And I've got a spouse, and I speak with a lot of women, and because I'm not a moron, those women do speak to me. Your experience may vary, of course, but when I ask those women, oh, when was the last time you were in a public toilet and you were bothered by, a man in there? It just doesn't happen. So you're inventing this whole sort of political narrative in your head because this little worm is in your head, which is based on bullshit. And people are trying to manipulate you, and you don't seem to understand. And it's just a stupidity problem. It's not a trans problem. That's basically what's going on there. So there you go. We would like to do interview questions video again. I've already watched your older videos, but they were very helpful. New fact videos would be appreciated. You're right. I need to do a better effort of replacing some of the older videos that gave advice on various things. And also, yeah, like you, I really enjoyed, I did a couple of videos where I interviewed people who'd lived in America for a little while after having come through the DV lottery. And I found those interviews really interesting and I think very helpful to people. People have different perspectives. I fully understand not every person is going to agree with the way I live my life, right? Which is our friend from the police or whatever. It just proved that, he's the guy with the little green worm in his brain. I've got different opinions to some other people, which is fine. That's okay. You and I can differ in our opinions. But when I can get a chance to speak to someone who came from a different country and is living in this country, I think it's very educational and very interesting because people have been brought up in different ways and then come to America and they're living their own experience. So yeah, I love it. I want to do more of those sort of interviews in the future. I should spend more time. It's just a matter of time. I do work for a living. That's part of the problem. If I could convince my company to just send me the checks every month and not have to have me work, that would be great. But unfortunately, I can't do that. Okay, let's see. I'm just seeing if there's any questions here. Glad your live started when I'm less busy. I had the chance to be very active here. Thanks for giving us the opportunity to clear some of the doubts. You're very welcome. Okay, so keep up the good work. That's great. John saying WTF. Don't know what that's about. Good morning, Simon. Would you shed more light on Kristi Noem impeachment motion? So at the beginning of the video, when I talked about the three branches of government, Congress have the power to impeach a public official in Trump's organization, right? Including Kristi Noem, right? And so there are some Democrat Congress members, I'm not sure whether it's in the House or the Senate, who have tried to launch an impeachment. An impeachment is basically like a prosecution and can lead to the removal of that person from their position, right? So when Trump nominated Noem as Department of Homeland Security Secretary, that was then approved by the Senate. The Senate make that decision. And they say whether that person is going to be able to serve in that role or not. And some people don't get approved, right? Trump put forward some people and they weren't approved. Noem, unfortunately, which was an awful decision, Noem got through the process and was approved. Now, if she were to be impeached, in theory, they could remove her from the position, but the standard for removing her is very high. I think it's 2/3 in the Senate. So to get 2/3 of the Senate, 2/3 of the 100 senators to agree on removing her from her position is a very high standard to reach, right? It's a very high bar to reach. What she does has to be egregiously bad in order to get 2/3 of the Senate to remove her. So even though they'll have that motion, it doesn't mean that motion will go ahead and have any real teeth, right? Okay. John, yeah. What the fuck? I joined this stream late, and the first thing I heard was something about a guy bumping into a woman in a public toilet. Yeah, I know. We've been out we've been out in La La Land a little bit, talking about little green worms in people's heads. And some of the ways that people have been manipulated, John, into believing bad things will happen. But you need to create these little, for someone like Trump, you need to create these little monsters in order to say, you've got a problem. It's this little monster. This little monster is trans people going in bathrooms. It's a really bad monster. But don't worry, I can save you from the monster. And if you're a very stupid person, that can sound attractive, right? If you're a moron, that sounds real, right? But the reality is, last time I checked, it's not really the problem that they're trying to make it out to be. And it's not about women's sports and everything else. There's like 16 trans athletes in the country, in America. It's like, we're all worried and upset about stupid things because the government wants to manipulate us. Anyway, so all right, we're going to call that a day. What happens to those who already get DVVs? Okay, last question, because I think it's an important one. For those people who are already holding on to their DV lottery visa because it was issued before the pause, that visa is still valid, right? And you should still go and activate that in the USA. For people living in the USA that have previously activated their status, or for people that are not in the USA currently, but did previously activate their status, those people are all exempted from all these things, from the travel ban, from the pauses, from the 75 country pause and everything else. None of that is to do with you. If you previously entered the USA with your DV lottery visa, then you're now a lawful permanent resident and therefore exempt from all that crap, right? Whether you're in the country or outside the country or whatever, you don't have to worry. Now, you do have to worry these days about immigration, enforcement, ICE. They're running around like a bunch of, brown shirts, basically, doing some wacky stuff. My advice to you is it makes good sense to carry some copy of your immigration status, right? You're supposed to, as a DV lottery person, you're an immigrant, you're a green card holder. If you've got your physical green card, you should actually have it with you all the time. It should be in your wallet as part of your ID. You're actually required to carry it, and you're required to show that if asked by law enforcement officials. So if you are a green card holder and you're stopped by ICE or something because they're stopping you, you have to know your rights a little bit, right? As a green card holder, one of the requirements of you is that you show your green card. So have a photo of it on your phone if you don't have the physical card with you. If you're relying on your passport, visa, have a photo of that on your phone, right? Be prepared to show your immigration status while you're an immigrant in the USA, while you're a lawful permanent resident. Once you've naturalized, you have a slightly different perspective, a slightly different problem. I could be asked by immigration, by ICE, because of my English accent. I could be asked about whether I'm a citizen or not, all right? And I have to be honest. I can't lie and say I was born a US citizen. I have to say I'm a naturalized citizen. And that means that they might take some time to actually sort of, prove that. My best proof of that would be to show my American passport. But I don't carry that around, and I'm not required to carry that around. So, you just have to be somewhat compliant. But if you are, whether you're a naturalized citizen or whether you're a born American citizen, you have the right to tell these people to F off. You're very welcome to tell them to F off. And you should do. It's very important that you do that. But you also have to do certain things of compliance, right? Don't be as bold as me. My wife actually asked me to email her with a couple of the lawyers that I speak with frequently in case I'm picked up and put in immigration jail or something. She was that worried about me, because I'll probably be a bit stupid if I'm ever picked up by ICE or cops or something. So there you go. All right, I see there's more questions, but I'll have to call it a day. Otherwise, I'll be here all day. Sorry for that impromptu break in the middle of the live session here. I think I've got a laptop problem. Ultimately, I've been buying various things, new cables and stuff like that, but I think I'm going to have to buy a new laptop because my laptop just in the middle of this session just decided it was going to go to sleep. So maybe it's time for a new laptop. And this is a really fancy laptop as well. So I'm not quite sure what's going on with it, but I can't be bothered to fix it. I'll just buy a new one. So anyway, all right, everybody, please do. Please do. Yeah, right. There you go, John. I asked for my green card by TSA when I flew out of the USA once. And that's fair, actually, because they want to record that you have left because they want to know when you're going to come back, right? So they record that information. They want to start that clock, and they get information from the airlines as well. So they want to know who's who's getting on the planes, etc., in both directions. So yeah. Anyway. If you've got any further questions, if you ask a question I didn't get to it, please do ask that question at britsimonsays.com. I'd be more than happy to answer that for you there. All right. Good luck, everybody. Try and stay calm. Everything's okay. This is all very temporary. I do believe these pauses are temporary. But hopefully over the next few days, I'll have a session with Curtis and talk about the lawsuits and what can be done through the lawsuits. All right. Thanks, everyone. Cheers now. Bye-bye.